Good Sunday morning. Happy Mother's Day to you. I'm Hugh Keeton.
Absolutely. I'm Bill Snyder, and welcome to WLOX News this week. We're going to start with our state auditor and his crackdown on government waste.
Earlier this week, I had a chance to talk with Shad White about what he's finding right now. Joined here by State Auditor Shad White. Thanks for joining us here on WLOX. And you were speaking here at Gulf Coast Young Professionals meeting. When you go around the state and you speak to groups like this, what kind of questions do you get?
Well, for groups like this, I get a lot of questions about Mississippi's future. What do we need to be doing to make sure that Mississippi achieves its potential for the next 25 years? And obviously, a lot of what I talk about is cutting waste and fat out of state government, getting that money going to roads and bridges, teacher salaries, cop salaries, tax cuts, the stuff that actually makes a difference to real people's lives. And I think young professionals know that we need to be thinking about what the state's going to look like in 25 years. We need energetic leadership that's going to usher that future in. If we're not willing to make some tough choices and do some difficult things, then our future's not going to be as bright as it can be.
This week, your office made an announcement on what you described as inappropriate spending with nonprofit groups. There was money that was designed to go towards HIV prevention. You found that it went to parties and other things. So after you make this discovery, what's the next step in bringing back some of this spending?
Yeah, well, I think the next step has really already happened. We released this audit that showed that there was tons of money, about $800,000, that went to 3 nonprofits. The purpose of the grant was to pay for HIV testing, and unfortunately, when you look at how they spent the $800,000, they only did about 35 tests, or tests that they can prove that they did. A lot of it was spent on parties like diva brunches, their words. So really, what happens after that, we release the audit, and then you're hoping that the state agency that we did the audit of actually makes some changes in their processes, and in this case they did. They said that mistakes were made and how they were prioritizing different grants, and so the nonprofits that we highlighted are no longer going to be getting those funds.
How common is it, not just with these agencies, so to speak, but nonprofits across the board spending money where maybe it's not intended to use?
We have some good nonprofits in Mississippi, but unfortunately it is very common to see taxpayer money going to nonprofits and then being mishandled. Sometimes it's fraudulent, so sometimes somebody is stealing the money, but a lot of times it's just simply wasteful, and that's what we found here. Money that's going to nonprofits, you're hoping that they do what they're supposed to do, which is test people for sexually transmitted diseases, and instead what you get is a bunch of parties. You get Lyft ride shares in New York City, bar hopping in the middle of the night. Those are being paid for by our taxpayer dollars. It's happening even here in Mississippi, in a red state. And so this is stuff that you would think you would see at the federal level or maybe in a state like California or New York, but that kind of government waste happens even here in Mississippi. We've got to have political leadership that's going to put a stop to this and be smarter about how we spend money.
No one has been more outspoken against DEI spending than you, and the state legislature did take a big step this year in pulling back DEI spending in public schools. Were you satisfied there, and do you feel like that they could pull back more money in other areas for DEI?
Well, I think the bill was a good step in the right direction. I was disappointed that it took 3 years to get done. Some other states, I think, are doing more. So, for example, North Carolina shut down DEI offices at their universities. They took the money that they were spending on DEI, and they instead started spending that on campus police. That's just good common sense decision making. That's the kind of reform we need at our universities. It's the kind of reform that our politicians in Jackson need to be putting into place. And so I'm going to keep talking about that kind of waste until we get the perfect legislative solution done.
Right now, the state legislature is working on a state budget. It has to be done before July 1st with a special session. You have a lot of ideas, and you've talked about to cut spending. How receptive have members of the legislature been for some of your ideas?
I think some members of the legislature have been super receptive to the cuts that we have proposed. Unfortunately, none of the bills that we got authored passed this year. And frankly, I think that's just a problem with some of the political establishment figures that are running some of the committees, particularly in the state Senate. That's the frustrating thing as state auditor, is you can find fraud, waste, and abuse. You can't actually stop the fraud, waste, and abuse. I can't cut contracts on my own. We can just audit. But my opinion is, if I keep talking about all of the fat in state government and all of the inefficient spending, at some point the establishment, the political establishment, starts to listen, and at some point we'll make these changes. If they don't, I think the voters are going to elect people who will make those changes.
Talking to lawmakers, they are concerned about the budget this year because of potential federal cuts coming in. So it seems like they're open to cuts this year. Why wouldn't they go along with some of this wasteful spending you feel like that you proposed?
I think some of it has to do with politics, and some of it has to do with decision makers looking at me and they think, well, maybe I want to run for governor and they want to run for governor too, and so then there's a political problem there. I don't wake up thinking about that every day. What I wake up thinking about is, can we find ways for state government to get better? Can I make a good, strong argument for making those changes? And then we should all agree together that making those changes is a good thing for the state. And if we could all do that and we could all achieve success for the state, I think we as a people, we're going to do better, and the politics will take care of itself after that. Unfortunately, not a lot of other people take that approach, so I'm just going to keep doing my job, keep finding fraud, waste, and abuse, keep talking about it to the public, and then hopefully over time changes will get made.
DOJ seems like something you're all the way behind at the federal level, and you're talking about ways of bringing what DOJ is doing at the federal level here to the state. What is DOJ doing right now that's working, and how can it work in Mississippi?
Well, I think DOJ is taking a very methodical approach to looking at every single penny of federal spending. They're looking at where that money is going. They're even looking at, the end recipients to see their birthdays, to see if their birthdays are sometime in the future, or maybe the birthdays of somebody who's 150 years old who's getting a government benefit. That's why DOJ is inspiring, because it leads us to be even more detailed about what we're looking at. Now, I've said this repeatedly, DOJ is doing a great job, but they don't have access to the state data systems that we do, and they don't have access to, say, a local nonprofit that's getting a grant, and don't have the ability to walk down the street and visit that nonprofit and ask tough questions about how they're spending money. So DOJ is necessary, but really every state needs its own version of DOJ, and we're happy to serve that function here in the state of Mississippi.
Shad White, State Auditor, nice talking with you today.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it.
So State Auditor Shad White there, catching up with him, and we certainly have not heard the last of Shad White.
Oh, absolutely not, with a lot of looking into those funding issues.